This little homeless girl is humiliated for offering to fix a millionaire's car in exchange for food. But when she starts, everyone is shocked and discovers who her father is. Comment, giving a rating from 0 to 10. For my story, your opinion is very important, and become a member of my channel for access to exclusive videos. The roar of the imported engine echoed through the narrow streets of Bridgeport before sputtering and dying completely. Jake Harrison, 30 years old, slammed his fist on the steering wheel of his metallic blue BMW, feeling the familiar anger rise in his chest. To the eyes of the passers-by on Main Street, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly styled dark hair, a bespoke suit that cost more than many residents' annual salaries, and that face that the secretaries at his dealership network always whispered about. But at that moment, all his matinee idol looks couldn't solve the mechanical problem that left him stuck at Bridgeport's busiest intersection. Jake got out of the car, adjusted his Italian tie, and opened the hood with precise movements. Each gesture demonstrated his obsession with perfection, a characteristic that had made him the most successful businessman in the region, owner of the largest dealership network in Connecticut. His assets in financial applications grew every month. His investments in stock market shares generated substantial dividends, and even his small bets in Bitcoin were starting to yield good profits. But all his wealth couldn't decipher why that German engine, which cost the equivalent of a house, simply refused to work. "Trouble with your car, mister." The thin, childish voice made him look up from the engine. Before him stood the most frail child he had ever seen. Lily appeared to be no more than 4 years old, although something in her big, dark eyes suggested more maturity. Her clothes were dirty with dirt and oil. Her tangled brown hair fell over shoulders too thin for a healthy child. Beside her, a young woman of 18 watched the scene with a cautious expression. "I can take a look," Lily continued, pointing to the engine with a small, dirty finger. Jake couldn't hide the sarcastic laugh that escaped his lips. "Are you serious? You're a kid. She knows about engines," said Sarah, the young woman beside Lily, in a voice that mixed defiance and protection. Her blonde hair was tied in a simple ponytail, and her clothes, although clean, showed signs of much wear. "Knows about engines," Jake repeated, as if he had heard the biggest joke in the world. "Listen, I don't have time for games. This is an imported vehicle that's worth more than you two will see in your entire lives." Lily took a step forward, without being intimidated by the businessman's harsh tone. "Will you get me a sandwich, if I can get it running?" The simple question hit Jake like a punch in the stomach, but he quickly masked any sign of compassion. His perfectionist nature didn't allow him to show weakness, especially in front of people he considered inferior. Throughout his life, he had learned that trusting others was synonymous with disappointment. "Get out of here before I call security," he said, slamming the hood shut, "and don't come near my car again." Some passers-by stopped to watch the scene. A middle-aged woman shook her head in disapproval. "How awful! A girl that age on the streets," she murmured to her companion. A man in a suit laughed loudly. "Imagine a street rat wanting to mess with Jake Harrison's car. They don't know who they're talking to." Sarah held Lily's hand tightly. "Let's go, Lily. He doesn't deserve your help." But Lily remained standing, her eyes fixed on the BMW's engine. "It's not electrical," she said, her childish voice contrasting with the technical certainty of the words. "It's the fuel pump. It's failing because the filter is clogged with impurities from the tank. Did you fill up at a different gas station recently?" Jake froze. He'd actually tried a new gas station the previous week, against his usual routine of always using the same supplier. But how could a child know that just by looking at the engine for a few seconds? "Lucky guess," he muttered, getting back into the car. He tried to start it 3 more times, but the engine only coughed and died. The traffic light had already gone through several cycles, and the cars behind him began to honk impatiently. Jake felt the heat rise in his face, the public humiliation being something his controlling personality simply couldn't stand. Lily continued standing on the sidewalk, watching him with those eyes that seemed to see much more than should be possible for a 4-year-old child. Occasionally, she moved her lips as if she were talking to someone invisible, a habit that Sarah had already learned to ignore. "Grandpa, he's scared," whispered Lily, so softly that only Sarah could hear. "What are you talking about, Lily?" asked Sarah, crouching beside the girl. "The car. It's scared of its owner. That's why it doesn't want to work right." Sarah frowned. Lily always said strange things about vehicles, as if they were living creatures with feelings. It was just another one of the peculiarities that made that child so special and yet so mysterious. After 15 minutes of trying to solve the problem alone, Jake finally admitted his temporary defeat. He called the tow truck from one of his dealerships, but the attendant informed him that it would take at least an hour to arrive. An hour stuck at that traffic light, being watched by half the city, was unacceptable for someone with his reputation. That's when Lily approached the car again, this time completely ignoring Jake's presence. She placed her small hand on the hood and closed her eyes, as if she were listening to something that no one else could perceive. "I know what it needs," she said, opening her eyes and looking directly at Jake. "But you're going to have to trust me." Jake stared at her for long seconds. His rational mind screamed that it was ridiculous, that a street child could never solve a problem that he, with all his experience and resources, couldn't. But something in Lily's eyes disturbed him deeply. There was an ancient wisdom there, as if she carried knowledge that shouldn't exist in such a young mind. "If you can get this car running," he said finally, his voice lower, "I'll buy you a sandwich. But if you're wasting my time—" "I'm not," interrupted Lily with a confidence that made Jake shiver. The girl positioned herself in front of the open hood, and with movement surprisingly safe for someone of her age and size, began to tinker with specific engine components. Her small hands seemed to know exactly where to touch, as if following an invisible map engraved in her memory. In less than 5 minutes, she closed the hood and waved for Jake to try to start it again. The engine purred to life on the first try, running with a smoothness it hadn't had in weeks. Jake was silent, staring at Lily through the windshield. The crowd that had formed began to murmur in astonishment. Some took photos with their cell phones, others simply watched in amazement. "How?" began Jake, getting out of the car. But Lily was already walking in the opposite direction, hand in hand with Sarah. "The sandwich is for another time," shouted the girl over her shoulder, without looking back. Jake remained standing in the middle of the street, watching the two figures disappear into the crowd of pedestrians. For the first time in years, his perfectionist mind couldn't categorize or explain what he had just witnessed. And for the first time since building his financial empire, Jake Harrison wondered if he really knew anything about the world around him. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter at the traffic light, but Jake couldn't get that strange child out of his mind. Sitting in his office on the top floor of Harrison Motors, he looked at the financial reports that should bring satisfaction, but only confirmed his worst fears. In the last 2 months, customers had been returning vehicles with unexplained mechanical problems that none of his technicians could solve. The situation was costing a fortune. His investments in real estate funds had to be liquidated to cover the compensations, and even part of his capital in euros had to be converted to maintain the company's cash flow. The perfection he had always demanded of his business was being stained by flaws he had no idea how to fix. Mark Thompson, his main competitor in the region, didn't miss an opportunity to spread rumors about the decline of Harrison Motors in Bridgeport's business circles. The two had been partners years ago, but a bitter dispute over business methods had turned them into declared enemies. "Mr. Harrison?" His secretary's voice interrupted his somber thoughts. "Mr. Davis is here to talk about the BMW he bought last week." Jake sighed. Another dissatisfied customer. "You can send him in," Robert Davis, a respected lawyer in the city, entered the office with a furious expression. "Jake, I bought that vehicle for almost $200,000 and it just stopped working yesterday. My mechanic said they've never seen anything like it." "What's the exact problem?" asked Jake, trying to maintain professional composure. "Completely dead electrical system. Lights, air conditioning, even the digital panel. As if something had sucked all the energy out of the car." Robert crossed his arms. "I want my money back, or you're going to have serious problems with me." After Robert left, threatening to sue the dealership, Jake called Maria, his chief technician. "Maria, I need you to tell me honestly, do you have any idea what's causing these problems?" The pause on the other end of the line was revealing. "Sir, we've already called specialists from Hartford, even from New York. No one can explain it. It's like the cars are sabotaged, but we haven't found evidence of external interference." Jake hung up and watched the street traffic below. That's when he saw her. Lily walked on the opposite sidewalk, holding Sarah's hand, both carrying plastic bags that probably contained their only possessions. The girl stopped suddenly and looked directly at the office window, as if she knew he was watching. Even from that distance, Jake could swear she was smiling. An absurd idea began to take shape in his mind. That child had diagnosed and solved the problem of his BMW in minutes. What if she really understood engines in a way that defied all logic? That night, Jake did something he never imagined. He left his luxurious penthouse in downtown to look for two homeless people. He drove through the poorest areas of Bridgeport, places he normally avoided, trying to locate Lily and Sarah. He found them under a marquee near the bus terminal. Sarah was sharing a sandwich with Lily, who hummed softly a melody he didn't recognize. Upon seeing the BMW approach, Sarah immediately placed herself in front of the girl, in a protective position. "What do you want?" asked Sarah, her voice full of suspicion. Jake got out of the car and approached slowly, his hands visible to show he posed no threat. "I need to talk to you. It's about cars." Lily looked up from the sandwich. "Your car is working fine now. Why are you back here?" The simple question caught him off guard. "It's not about my car, it's about other cars, many others." "Lily, we don't need to listen to this," said Sarah, beginning to collect her things. "Wait." Jake took out his wallet and extended some bills. "Let me buy you a decent meal. In exchange, I just want a conversation." Sarah hesitated, looking at the money and then at Lily, who seemed more interested in what Jake had to say than in the food. 30 minutes later, they were sitting in a 24-hour diner. Jake watched, fascinated and disturbed, as Lily devoured a hamburger as if she hadn't eaten in days. She probably hadn't. "How did you learn about engines?" he asked. Lily stopped chewing and looked at him with those big, intelligent eyes. "My grandpa taught me." "Your grandfather is a mechanic?" The girl nodded, but offered no further details. Sarah interjected. "He's no longer with us." Jake noticed the sadness that crossed Lily's face for an instant before she went back to eating. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Lily has a gift," said Sarah softly. "She can hear when cars are sick, as she says." "Hear? They make different noises when they're sad," explained Lily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, like when a person is crying softly. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. The way she talked about vehicles, as if they were living creatures, was both touching and disturbing. "Lily," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I have many sick cars. Could you help me heal them?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What do you really want?" "My company is in crisis. Customers returning vehicles with problems that my technicians can't solve. If Lily really has this ability, you want to use a child to save your business?" Sarah's voice was full of contempt. "I want to help you both," replied Jake, surprising himself with his own sincerity, "in exchange for help." Lily stopped eating again and stared directly at him. "What do you offer?" "Housing, food, clothes, education." He paused. "And something else." If you help me solve the car's problems, I'll build a special workshop. A place where children like you can learn about engines and have a better future." Sarah laughed bitterly. "And why should we trust you? You kicked us out on the street 3 weeks ago." "Because," said Jake slowly, "I was wrong, and because you don't have many other options." Lily placed her small hand on Sarah's arm. "He's not lying," she whispered. "I can feel it." "Feel what, Lily?" "That he's scared, like the sick cars." The girl looked at Jake. "You lost someone important, didn't you?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow. How could a 4-year-old child read his emotions so easily? "That doesn't matter," he murmured. "Yes, it does," Lily said softly. "That's why you're afraid to trust people. Just like I was afraid of adults before Sarah found me." Sarah watched the interaction with growing concern. There was something in the way Jake looked at Lily that made her uncomfortable. It wasn't malice, but an intensity that suggested obsession. "If we agree," Sarah said slowly, "what are the conditions? You live in an apartment that I'll rent. Lily helps me with the problematic cars a few hours a day. In return, she receives education, medical care, and I start the construction of the workshop school." "What about me?" asked Sarah. Jake studied her for a moment. There was something in that young woman's determination that impressed him, although he didn't want to admit it. "You supervise everything. If at any moment you think I'm not fulfilling my part of the agreement, you can leave." Lily whispered something in Sarah's ear, who shook her head in response. "We have a condition," said Sarah finally. "Lily only works if she wants to. If she says no on any day, you respect it." "Agreed. And you build the workshop first. We want to see that you're serious before we start helping with your cars." Jake hesitated. It was a lot of money to invest based only on the word of a street child, but looking at Lily, who watched him with those eyes that seemed to see his soul, he nodded. "Very well. We have a deal." When they left the diner, Lily turned to Jake one last time. "Mr. Harrison?" "Yes?" "Your cars aren't really sick. Someone is hurting them on purpose." Jake's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "Because," said Lily, her childish voice contrasting with the gravity of the words, "I can feel the evil that stuck to them." And with that disturbing revelation, the girl walked towards the BMW, leaving Jake wondering what kind of situation he had gotten himself into. 2 months after the agreement, Jake watched Lily work in her third garage of the day. The girl was crouched beside an imported Mercedes, her small hands moving with surgical precision among the engine components. What disturbed him most wasn't just her technical skill, but the way she talked softly to the vehicle, as if she were comforting an injured child. "I know it hurts," she whispered to the engine. "Someone put a bad thing in you, but I'll take it out." Sarah watched from afar, her arms crossed in a posture that Jake had learned to recognize as extreme protection. In recent months, the young woman had become even more vigilant, especially after discovering that Jake was secretly documenting each of Lily's work sessions, recording videos of the girl's impossible diagnoses. "Done," announced Lily, closing the hood of the Mercedes. "It's going to run well now." The vehicle's owner, a local businessman named Frank, turned the ignition with skepticism. The engine purred smoothly, without any trace of the electrical problems that had plagued the car for weeks. "How did she do that?" asked Frank to Jake, while Lily went to wash her hands. "Natural talent," replied Jake vaguely, an answer that had become automatic. The truth was much more complicated. In 2 months, Lily had solved 43 cases that the best technicians in the region considered impossible. Each diagnosis came with technical details that a 4-year-old child should never know. And always, she insisted that someone was hurting the cars intentionally. But what really haunted Jake were the moments when Lily stopped working and looked into the void, moving her lips as if she were talking to an invisible presence. When asked about these episodes, she simply said that she was talking to Grandpa Ernie. That afternoon, after Lily had cured 3 more impossible vehicles, Jake took her to the land where the workshop school was being built. The project had consumed a significant portion of his gold reserves and even some of his most liquid assets, but he was keeping his promise. "It's getting pretty," said Lily, watching the walls that were beginning to take shape. "It'll be the best technical training center in the region," replied Jake, and realized that he really believed it. That's when Mark Thompson appeared on the land, accompanied by 2 men in suits that Jake didn't recognize. "Jake, my old partner," said Mark with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I heard you found an interesting solution to your problems." "I don't know what you're talking about," replied Jake, instinctively positioning himself between Mark and Lily. "A little girl who solves impossible mechanical problems. What a fascinating story." Mark crouched down to be at Lily's height. "Hi, little one. What's your name?" Lily hid behind Jake's legs, something she had never done before. "He smells bad," she whispered. Sarah, who had remained silent until then, took a step forward. "I think you better leave." Mark laughed. "Interesting. A street girl who knows more about cars than trained engineers." He stood up and faced Jake. "You know you need to share your resources, don't you? We're competitors, but we're also from the same city." "She's not a resource," said Jake through gritted teeth. "She's a child." "Is she?" Mark took an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "Because I have here some very interesting videos. Videos of a child performing diagnoses that defy all scientific logic." Jake's stomach tightened. How had Mark gotten those videos? "I imagine how much the press would pay for a story like that," continued Mark. "Businessman exploits street child to save failing business. What an interesting headline." Lily tugged at Jake's sleeve. "He's the bad man," she said in a whisper. "The one who hurts the cars." The girl's words struck Jake like lightning. "What did you say?" "He has the smell of the evil that stuck to the cars," repeated Lily, pointing at Mark. "He's the one who made the cars sick." Mark laughed again, but there was a tension in his voice now. "What a fertile imagination. Maybe she should write stories instead of tinkering with engines." Jake felt the anger grow in his chest. Months of financial problems, dissatisfied customers, sleepless nights, all orchestrated by the man who had already betrayed his trust once in the past. "It was you," he said slowly. "You sabotaged my cars." "Proof, Jake." "Where's the proof?" Mark made a theatrical gesture. "But it doesn't matter. I'm here to make a proposal. You lend me the girl a few hours a week, and I forget about these compromising videos." "Never." "Then maybe I should make an offer directly to you two," said Mark, turning to Sarah and Lily. "I can offer you much more than this man. Enough money for a comfortable life." Sarah picked up Lily. "We're not for sale." "Everyone has a price," replied Mark. "You're living on charity. I offer independence." That's when Lily did something that shocked everyone present. She got down from Sarah's arms, walked to Mark, and touched his hand. The man recoiled instantly, as if he had been burned. "What the hell?" "You're very sick inside," said Lily with the seriousness of an experienced doctor. "That's why you hurt the cars. They feel your sadness and get sick too." Mark's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," continued the girl. "You lost someone very important, a person who loved cars as much as you do. And now you want to hurt all the cars so they feel the same pain you feel." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind passing through the beams of the construction. Mark stared at Lily as if she were a ghost. "You don't know anything," he said finally, but his voice trembled. "Yes, I do," replied Lily softly. "Because my grandpa Ernie told me about men like you. People who turn their pain into evil for others." Mark took several steps back. "Ernie, what Ernie?" "My grandpa. He says you knew him a long time ago." Mark's expression changed completely. The cynicism gave way to something that looked like genuine fear. "That's impossible. Ernie Miller disappeared decades ago." Jake felt the world spin around him. "Ernie Miller? The legendary mechanic?" Lily nodded as if it were obvious. He taught me everything about cars. Said that one day I would find good people who would need my help. Ernie Miller died 5 years ago, said Mark, his voice now just a whisper. Didn't die, corrected Lily. He's always with me. Sometimes I talk to him. Sarah, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. Lily, you never told me your grandfather was famous. It's not important to be famous, replied the girl. It's important to be good. Mark took a few more steps back, his 2 companions following him nervously. This isn't over, he said to Jake. If she really is Ernie Miller's granddaughter, then she's worth much more than you imagine. She's not worth anything, exploded Jake. She's not a commodity. But Mark was already walking towards his car, apparently shaken by the revelation. Before getting into the vehicle, he shouted, Be careful, Jake. You're not the only one who knows about her talent now. After Mark left, the 3 were silent on the construction site. Jake looked at Lily with a mixture of fascination and growing terror. If she really was the granddaughter of the legendary Ernie Miller, that would explain her impossible knowledge, but it also meant that she was much more valuable than he had imagined, and much more dangerous to have around. Lily, said Sarah softly, can you tell me more about your grandpa? Lily smiled, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. He taught me that cars have souls, and that bad people can hurt those souls. She looked in the direction where Mark had left. That man will try to separate us. I'll never let that happen, said Jake, surprised at the vehemence of his own voice. But as he watched Lily walk among the beams of the workshop under construction, talking softly to her invisible grandfather, Jake wondered if he really had the power to keep that promise, especially now that they knew who she really was. A week after the confrontation with Mark, Lily fell seriously ill. Jake found her unconscious in the apartment he had rented for the 2, with a high fever and delirious about crying cars and a grandfather who was calling her away. Sarah was in a panic, holding the girl's hot little hand, while tears rolled down her face. She keeps saying she needs to leave, sobbed Sarah, that someone is coming to get her. At the hospital, doctors were alarmed by Lily's state of chronic malnutrition and asked awkward questions about her origin. Jake had to use all his influence to prevent social workers from getting involved, but he knew it was only a matter of time. For 3 days, Lily remained unconscious. Jake practically lived at the hospital, watching that frail child fighting against something that the doctors couldn't identify. It was on the 3rd day that she finally opened her eyes and said something that would change everything forever. Grandpa Ernie is coming to get me, she announced with a disturbing clarity. He said I can go with him now. Lily, your grandfather can't come get you, said Sarah gently. Remember what you told me. He passed away years ago. Didn't pass away, insisted the girl, sitting up in the hospital bed. He hid because bad people wanted to steal his inventions. But now he knows you're good people. That's why he can come back. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Lily, what are you saying? That he's waiting outside the hospital, she replied as if it were obvious. Wants to meet you. Sarah and Jake exchanged worried glances. The illness had worsened the girl's delusions, making her believe that her dead grandfather was physically present. That's when a nurse entered the room. Sorry, there's an elderly gentleman outside saying he's the girl's grandfather. He has some documents. The silence in the room was absolute. Jake felt his legs go weak. What gentleman? A man about 75 years old, white hair, very polite. Said his name is Ernie. Lily smiled for the first time in days. I told you he was coming. 15 minutes later, Ernie Miller entered the hospital room, walking slowly, but with dignity. He was a tall, thin man, with completely white hair and eyes that shone with the same deep intelligence that Jake recognized in Lily. His calloused hands told the story of decades working with engines, and there was a softness in his expression that immediately conveyed trust. My little granddaughter, he said, approaching the bed and taking Lily's small hands in his own. I missed you all these years. "Grandpa!" exclaimed Lily, throwing herself into the old man's arms. "It took you so long to come back." Jake watched the scene in absolute shock. How is this possible? Everyone said that you had died." Ernie laughed softly without taking his eyes off his granddaughter. "That's what they needed to believe. After the accident that almost killed us, I realized that there were dangerous people after my inventions, people who wouldn't hesitate to use a child to get what they wanted." "So, you faked your own death and left Lily an orphan?" Sarah's voice was full of indignation. "I left her with people I thought would take good care of her," replied Ernie, the pain evident in his voice. "When I found out that she had run away from the orphanage and was living on the streets, I spent 2 years looking for her, until she found us," completed Jake, beginning to understand. "Exactly. You two did something that I couldn't. Gave her not only safety, but love. True love." Ernie looked at Jake and then at Sarah. "That's why I decided it was time to come out of the shadows." Sarah wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "But why now?" "Because Mark Thompson found out who she is," said Ernie grimly. "And he's not the only one interested in my granddaughter's talents. There are others, people with a lot of money and power, who would pay any amount to have access to what she knows." "What kind of people?" asked Jake, although he feared the answer. "Unscrupulous businessmen, collectors of child prodigies, people who see unique talents as lucrative investments." Ernie squeezed Lily's hand. "My granddaughter isn't just special for understanding engines. She inherited an ability that I developed over decades, the ability to connect with machines on an almost spiritual level. That's why she talks to the cars," murmured Sarah. "And that's why Mark was able to sabotage them," added Jake, the pieces finally falling into place. "He knew your work." Ernie nodded gravely. "Mark was my apprentice 30 years ago. When he found out that I had died, he began using distorted versions of my techniques for destructive purposes. He knows that Lily can detect his sabotages, and that threatens him." At that moment, the door to the room burst open. Mark entered accompanied by 2 security guards and a man in an expensive suit that Jake didn't recognize. "Ernie Miller," said Mark with a cruel smile. "I knew you weren't dead." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, my name is Dr. Austin Myers. I represent a consortium of investors who are very interested in your granddaughter's talent. We are prepared to offer a substantial amount—" "Get out of here," interrupted Jake, placing himself in front of the bed where Lily clung to her grandfather. "Jake, you don't understand the magnitude of what you're dealing with," said Mark. "This child is worth millions, billions in technological potential." "She's not for sale," said Sarah firmly. Dr. Myers laughed. "Señorita, you don't have the resources to protect her properly. We can offer first-class education, research facilities, a future that you could never provide." That's when Ernie stood up slowly. "Doctor, you're wrong about one fundamental thing." "And what would that be?" "You think Lily needs protection." Ernie smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "But the truth is, you're the ones who should be afraid of her." Lily got out of bed and walked to Dr. Myers. She lightly touched his hand, and the man immediately recoiled, as if he had been shocked. "You have 3 cars," she said in her childish voice. "One has a problem with the braking system. Another will stop working next week. And the third—" She paused, tilting her head as if she were listening to something. "The third will never work for you again." "That's ridiculous," said Dr. Myers, but there was nervousness in his voice. "It isn't," Lily replied calmly. "Because I asked them not to work anymore. The cars don't like people who want to hurt children." At that moment, Dr. Myers' cell phone rang. He answered it irritably. "Yes? What? All 3? How is that possible?" Jake watched the man pale as he spoke on the phone. "My cars," murmured Dr. Myers after hanging up, "all with total electrical failure simultaneously." Ernie laughed softly. "As I said, Doctor, You're the ones who should be afraid of her. Mark, who had remained silent, finally spoke. This isn't going to end here, Ernie. There are other people interested, people who won't give up so easily. Let them come, replied the old mechanic. But let them know that my granddaughter isn't alone anymore. She has a family now. Dr. Myers and his men left the room quickly, followed by Mark, who shot one last threatening look before leaving. When they were alone, Ernie turned to Jake and Sarah. Do you still want to take care of her, knowing the dangers that this can bring? Jake looked at Lily, who had returned to the bed and watched him with those big, trusting eyes. She's not a burden, he said. She's family. Sarah nodded, wiping away more tears. We love her. And I love you, said Lily softly. Grandpa, can they stay with us? Ernie smiled, and for the first time in years, Jake saw genuine hope in an adult's eyes. Of course, little granddaughter, we're going to be a real family. 6 months later, the workshop school was fully operational. Ernie had become the head instructor, teaching not only Lily, but dozens of underprivileged young people the secrets of mechanics. Jake discovered that his true fortune wasn't in his financial applications or assets, but in the love he had found with his new family. Sarah, now married to Jake and pregnant with a girl they decided to name Hope, managed the social aspects of the workshop, and Lily, now 5 years old and finally healthy, grew up surrounded by the love and protection she always deserved. Grandpa, she asked one afternoon, while they were working together on an engine, why did it take you so long to come back to me? Ernie paused his work and looked at his granddaughter. Because sometimes we need to get lost to find the right way home, little granddaughter. Lily smiled and returned to work, humming softly the melody that her mother used to sing, a song about free birds that had finally found their nest. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.